Well, thank you, and thank you to our panel discussion, and thank you for all the guests. Steli, you're a tough act to follow. Very glad to have you and all of you here, because I will let you do most of the talking. I will start with a very brief presentation, though. We'll be talking about disruption of global markets, the ingredients of the secret black box. You know, it's a beautiful title. I have no idea what it means. So I was thinking a lot, what is really disruption? How do you measure disruption? And the idea was, you know, you can measure disruption. Disruption changes everything. It changes the markets. It changes the way that people do things. And luckily in startups, we have companies that we can easily measure. Unicorns are the ones that are leading the disruptions. And disruptions is actually leading to unicorns. These are the companies that are changing the way that things are done. And we have, luckily, more and more unicorns. If you look at this map, which you probably can't really see very well, you know, the number of unicorns is really increasing fast. A lot of people say we have a bubble going on here. What I say, I'm an optimist by nature, we have a lot of disruption going on here. This is the way the disruption looks like. Facebook against MySpace, you know, it's something that you are taught at business schools. MySpace was there first, and they were claiming to do the disruption. Then Facebook came along, a bunch of failed students, and did this. They got basically the whole industry going. They got the dominant market share. And this is happening all across the board. This is not happening only in social networks. It's happening everywhere. I have never imagined that a small app on my mobile phone will be able to disrupt taxi drivers, you know. That was the one market you could never disrupt. Well, obviously, I was wrong. You can see that happening in the time that big companies take to become established. You know, the typical large company used to take 20 years to become a unicorn, a company with a $1 billion valuation. You know, Google, it took them 8 years to do that. With Xiaomi, it took less than 2 years to do that. It turns out that this disruption in the way that things are happening can happen much, much faster, and the pace is accelerating. And it has become so widespread that even the economists had this in a special report a couple of years ago. They call it the Cambrian moment because life as we know it has changed in the Cambrian period, and they claim that business as we know it is being changed by this startup revolution. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask my guests here, based on your experience, what do you believe is needed for the development of these disruptive startups? I would just like to ask you to introduce yourself first. We know a couple of you already. We're going to know all of you later on. One sentence, who you are, what you do.
Who's starting?
I don't have a mic.
Oh.
Hi, Poornima from Femgineer. And your question was, how do these companies start off, or?
What do you believe is needed to create a disruptive company?
Yeah. So I think the companies that you see up there who have made a big impact, one focused on customer behavior. So companies like Airbnb and Uber, the big problem that both of them were tackling was we need a way to share space. We're already kind of doing this naturally, but how do we do it on a global level and invite either guests that we don't know or strangers into our homes? Same thing with Uber. How do we get a ride from somebody that we don't know in a new city that we're in? And so I think kind of fundamentally what they're doing is they're going back to what are already these experiences that people have, and how can we apply that more on a global level. And yes, there's things like, yes, we need to have great employees and revenue and investment and all that stuff, but I think fundamentally they're coming down to what's that customer experience, how do we make it as frictionless as possible, and what are existing behaviors we already see in the market.
Steli, can I ask you, do you think that creating a disruptive company is all about resources? Do we need more of everything to change the way industry works?
No.
What is the magic thing?
I'm just going to say no to everything. No, but I honestly think that that's not true. I think that, first of all, I don't know if I'm an expert in disrupting companies, depending on how you look at it, right? So we have a company that's in a very crowded space. I would have never thought I would go into that space, and we're doing really well. But I don't know. I think that fundamentally the only way I know how to think is you focus on the user or the customer, you serve them exceptionally well, And if you serve them in a way that truly hits a nerve, you might see that there is potential for something that's going to become much larger than what you initially even thought. So there's a bunch of these companies up there that from day one, they knew they wanted to take over the world. But there's also a bunch of companies that didn't. Facebook didn't. They didn't start and go, we're going to have every single human on this thing. It's going to be the biggest company ever. It's not what was the thought day one. How do we build a disruptive company? Let's brainstorm on this and then build Facebook. You know, similar to other things with Uber, you know, maybe the ambition in there because it was the second startup was one that was very quickly getting to the conclusion of how could we take over the world, but initially it was just like, it sucks to take a cab, let's just build an app that gets me a cab here or a nice car. So I think that when you start with the question, how do I build a disruptive company, I think a lot of bullshit can come out of that as a result. It's hard for me to believe that anyone ever built a disruptive company that started with that thought. It's very hard for me to believe that. So I think big things have small beginnings. You start small, and sometimes you go, oh shit, this thing could be huge, now that we see that we really hit a nerve. And then it's about not fucking it up. I mean, that's very hard to do, but it doesn't have to start with that question if you want to build that type of a company that's beautiful as an ambition, but I'm not sure if that should be your starting point necessarily.
Piotr, a question for you. Do you think that disruptive companies, they can benefit from becoming embedded in networks? Can they use external partners? I know what Steli would say to that, but do you think that's something that is useful for them?
Thank you, I just had to grab the mic. Well, first of all, I would like to just add a little bit to that. We basically forget about the human creativity, that it comes in process of first copying, transforming, and joining elements. And I have like a fun fact that Hunter S. Thomas retyped the whole Great Gatsby just to get the feeling of doing it. So I think that when creating something, you need to first learn how to copy things. And I'm not saying that to become like the copy fanatic, but you know, you need to really learn how things work in order to find out what doesn't work. But in terms of partnerships, I would agree with Steli that they are overrated, especially if the partners really are bullshitting you and you are just living on this false hope. And I've seen that so many times. So if you really want to do something well, do it alone. And I mean, just really focus on what you guys said, of really nudging the pain, what is happening, and you know, just work through the process and get the most of it.
Howard, can you comment on this? Do you have any thoughts on your own?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Alex. I'm the managing director of TechStars in New York. Thanks for having me. I mean, I think you guys said it perfectly. I think, you know, from my vantage point, all great things start small. And I think all the great companies start by solving very specific niche problem, and then they discover that the world wants their solution. But first they like nail very specific use case. And I think if you expand prematurely, if you think about kind of global domination too quickly, you're going to most likely fail. If you go too fast, you need to really own like a small niche first, and then you can become massive, like these companies that we're talking about.
If I could just add one more thing, and don't do it for the money. I mean, if you're really focused on the greedy part of yourself, you're never going to get there. I mean, you just have to focus on other things.
Damir, you have actually done some disruption on your own. You've created a company in Croatia that was later acquired, and I would say was disruptive for the telecommunications industry. Can you tell us your experience with this?
Okay, so my name is Damir, and I'm CEO and founder of PhotoMath. It's a company that is producing educational app that is actually very popular. So we built it. Actually, we built it to promote our core technology. And it's turned out it is very popular, but we had no idea. We thought it will have 100,000 downloads, and then a month later it had 5 million downloads, and we had no idea what to do with it. So it was more or less an accident, like we didn't plan for it. And so my philosophy is, so I built one company in Croatia. We sold it. It was internet service provider. It was also had no idea what it will become, but it was successful. So my recommendation to all startups is just to try things. So you need to like experiment and see if something will work and then go after it. And usually startups, they don't understand the market or even their product or what they have, but they will understand it through this process. And then my recommendation is just to try several things. We started like with electronic invoices, then created technology to pay invoices with mobile phone, and then we created Math app to demonstrate this technology, and it turned out that Math app is actually something that is creating actually big impact. So my recommendation is just try. Of course, not think about money. Money is like not good motivation. It's good motivation, but it will not get you there.
It should be a nice side effect of things.
It is. So if you really build something interesting, money will come.
So money is a side effect, says Piotr.
Well, I would say that. I mean, it is a good side effect. And also about disrupting, I mean, really noticing things is very important. I've just quite recently worked with a startup that is, I think, present somewhere here. It used to be called Facebooking, now it's called Hotelier, but I'm advising a different name for them. But their CEO, they've noticed a very important fact of how to treat people very personally in a hotel, and they noticed it by working in a hotel and noticing that just giving a person who loves donuts a donut for 50 cents works for them. And I know it sounds like a cliche story, but there are hundreds of thousands of hotel companies that are striving to become better for the customers, but they don't think about the simplest solutions sometimes. So, disrupting things can be just happening in a moment of just person realizing, okay, this works, and this is a very simple thing that works.
Howard, a question for you. Based on what we've heard now, it's not so much about the product, it's not so much about the money, it's not even so much about resources. I would say it's mostly about the mindset. Would you agree with that?
Hey everyone, I'm Howard. I'm founder of a company called Adludio, and we help brands touch their customers through mobile advertising. No, I completely agree. Like everything that everyone said about, solving a core problem, absolutely, when you're starting, that is the most important thing. But at the same time, I don't think the likes of Mark Zuckerberg ever had a small mindset when he was doing that. And when we talk about mindset, just from my own experience, I remember when I started my business kind of 4 years ago, I was having coffee with what became my first investor, this guy called Russell, who had, built this business and sold it to Google for $750 million, right? So clearly he knows what he's talking about, and he was able to help me, right? And he was kind of, when we were talking about what I was doing, he was like, oh, that's really cool. And like, do you have any investors or anything like that? And I said, oh, well, we've just gotten into a startup accelerator. They've given us like about $100,000, and that could do us maybe 4 years, right? And he just kind of like shook his head, and he was like, I don't think you're thinking big enough. The people that win in these kind of industries you're in is not who goes to market first, but who gets biggest fastest. And that for me was a real it's just something that I really remember flipped a switch in my mind about thinking bigger. It's not about just you being the first to market, but once you have something people want that has been discussed already, you need to be able to kind of have a big mindset and execute on it and try and get as big as you can, as fast as you can, because other people will copy you as fast when they see that you've got something that's good.
Would you agree that this graph tells the story? It's not, Facebook was not the first one, but it got the biggest, the fastest.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to go on with a few more slides, because it seems that there is something happening, and that these disruptive companies are being created, and they're getting there faster and faster, and it's, industries that we would never think about can really change overnight. But it seems that most of these started in the real world. There was no theory behind it. There was nothing that would tell you this is gonna happen, or even how to do it. And then, of course, the lean thinking, the lean startup, and the lean thinking and doing became obvious, I would say, after you read the book of Steve Blank. And it seems logical, but before you do so, of course, it's not. So the question, everybody, or at least a lot of the startups, are using the tools that were developed after they really were, after the practices were really implemented by the startups. Can I see the hands? Who knows what this is? Okay, so I would say most.
Who knows how to use it?
Good question, yeah. Who knows how to use it? No hands now. But if disruption can be studied and if some theories can be developed, then of course it can also be taught. And this is the foundation behind the whole industry that is now developing. It's the system of incubators, accelerators, and it's the system where basically we are creating startups with potential for disruption. And if you can see, there are many of them. It's a whole industry out there. I know Alex would agree with me. There are, accelerators these days everywhere you look, and everybody is trying to have this perfect combination of resources, of equities, of knowledge, of mentors, of everything that will help startups in these accelerators succeed. Not everyone actually succeed. There are some very clear, and I would like to congratulate you as well. Of course, TechStars is one of the leaders in this field and also one of the first ones there. But what are actually these institutions? What are these, we call these startup factories, and also factories for disruptions? What they do is basically they combine several factors, they educate, they connect, and also they validate both the products and the business model. And they do that by implementing 4 success factors. This is a study I have researched on the internet. I don't want to be too long about it, but I do want to question you. Do you believe that disruption can be taught and that it can be engineered?
No. I mean, I personally don't at all. Like, that's not what we do and that's not how we operate. What can be taught is how you can get behind amazing founders and help them accelerate their business. And, we never focus on, we really never focus on disruption, so to speak, but we focus on, do we believe that this set of founders is working on a really interesting problem, and do we feel like we can be helpful, and do they want us to be part of their story? So it's a very human thing, and it's very sort of like founder-centric. It's not, for us, founders and founding team is by far more important than the problem, really. I would fund a stronger team in a smaller market any time of the day compared to weaker team in a bigger market. So that's just kind of how we think about it.
On one hand, I'm tempted to say that there is this Anna Karenina principle that says that all great startups are alike and every bad startup is bad in its own way. But that's just a principle. But I would say that you cannot, get the startup with the same factors for success and achieve the same success. It's like in sports, you can have the quarterback that has the best elements of a quarterback, and he still will not succeed like someone else with the same. It just takes something more. It's not the element of copy and paste of certain factors. So I would say, no, I mean, you can of course educate people the best way you can, but you cannot copy and paste success.
So
how's there, oh, sorry.
Well, I was going to say the reason that you can't copy and paste success is also because the markets change, and they change very rapidly. And so if your market is changing and you try to use something that people did 5 or 10 years ago, it doesn't work out. And the reason is because it might have worked in their era. So for example, when we were at Mint, we started at 2006. A lot of the people ask me today, well, what did you do? And I tell them, I can't tell you, yes, I can tell you build a great product, have a wonderful UI, go raise capital. But a lot of the marketing techniques even that we used were so early on, and if you try to use them today, there's no way it's going to make any difference because at this point they've become so saturated. So a lot of it has to do with market timing, and then the second has to do with neglected customer segments. So customers that we went after were millennials who didn't have an idea about how to manage their money. Today there's a lot of financial products today targeted towards helping millennials with money, right? So there's a lot more competition. So market timing really impacts that, and sometimes learning isn't enough.
Has there been any, this is a question actually to maybe you, actually, has there been any stats to show that the failure rate of startups has decreased since the lean startup methodology has launched? Because my gut is, it probably does help, but there's such a kind of thing about like the sexification of starting up a startup recently. Everyone's doing it. I think people, that's probably increase the failure rate because people have been starting businesses who maybe shouldn't have started a business or maybe aren't natural entrepreneurs because they think it's the hot thing to do. So I think, yes, lean startup helps, but I think it's overbalanced by maybe people starting up who shouldn't have.
But I have some statistics that say not how many startups failed or the failure rate, how that has increased after the implementation of this methodology, but there are statistics out there that show that failure rate decreases for the startups that join incubators or accelerators. So my question for you and for all of you that would be, would you recommend startups to go to an institution like incubator or accelerator?
Depends on, do they have, if they don't have a strong network, wherever they are, whether it's because of what region they're in or because they're new to technology or because they don't have a technical background or whatnot, it can be very valuable for the networking side. And a lot of founders that I've coached have gone to those programs primarily for that. And then the second is, when you have that network, then you get more exposure either to investors, to employees, to customers, and so on. If you are already kind of in the know, meaning you've done a couple startups, you understand the principles, and you just want to focus, then you might not want to join an accelerator. You might just want to say, look, I know what I'm doing, I'm going to keep going for it. So there is a decision to make there.
I think the answer to almost every question is it depends, right? And that's such a bummer. Right? Because I'd love to have an answer that applies to everybody. Right? Wouldn't life be easier that way? But it just, there is not one path that we can all follow. Otherwise, why the fuck would there be conferences all around the world talking about this? We just have one blog post, everybody reads that, and we're good. But we went through Y Combinator with one of the companies that we did. I'm a mentor at 500 and a bunch of other incubators. I don't know. It really depends. And also just for us, YC was amazing because we got to work really closely with PG. And one of the biggest things we learned from him was focus. Like one of the most beautiful things that happened was day one, we talked about things and he went, okay, I think I get what you guys are trying to do. What is the one metric that we need to focus on? What is the one number that's the best indicator for success? And we said, maybe this, maybe that. He's like, but is that really an indicator for success just for us, not for investors or anybody else? Wouldn't that be the number? And we're like, nah, shit, you're right. And it was back then, we did a thing that required people to sign up with a credit card, right? So it's like, well, number of fully subscribed users with a credit card. That should be the number, right? We're like, cool. It's like, all right, can you promise me 10% growth of that number every single week for the next 3 months? And we're like, sure. We shook hands, and then when he wanted to take his hand away, I was like, do you have your credit card with you? And he's like, yeah. He's like, see, that's why I want you to focus on this. And then, we had 10 users at that point, so I was like, 10% growth, check, right? And we got and signed everybody else up that was in the building. And the beauty of that was that every week, it was such a beautiful tool to focus, because every week, when we looked at all the features we could build, all the marketing we could do, we just step back and ask ourselves, what of these things is most likely to generate 10% or more growth next week? And that was it. We had 25% growth week over week, and it generated a beautiful graph up and to the right, just in time for demo day. But that kind of focus was beautiful for us to learn, and it was actually a lot about focus at YC for us. But you could ask somebody else, another founder that went through the same batch as me, and he'll tell you a totally different experience, right? And maybe they didn't like it as much, or it wasn't as useful to them. It really depends on who you are and what accelerator you're working with, and even more so, who is going to be the person there you're going to be interacting most with. That can make all the difference in the world.
And I think that it absolutely depends on the kind of a mindset the people all have. I mean, if you have a growth mindset that is described by Carol Dweck in her research, that sort of is so totally different from a fixed mindset. And I mean, I'm not going to elaborate on that. You can all read the book. And I'm not personally, I don't have any profits from Carol Dweck's sales, but she really writes about how you succeed with the growth mindset, because when something is wrong, you don't tell that everyone
around is responsible for that, and that it was a wrong accelerator, or that the mentors were wrong. You know, you have to really think, okay, so what I did wrong and what was my mistake and how can I fix it, without, of course, being too sadistic, masochistic, you know.
One more thing on the lean startup thing, because he made a comment that is really important, is it's not did you read the book. It's also not did you apply some of the things in the book, it's how did you apply them. Because most founders that I meet, they're like, well, we have this idea and we validated it. I'm like, no shit, how? Yeah. Well, we went to 10 people and they all said, yeah, that idea sounds good.
And 8 of them were their family.
Hey, even if it wasn't their grandma, right? It does not matter. Hey, yeah, that sounds like a cool idea. Is very weak validation, if any, right? So instead of trying to validate your idea, how about trying to invalidate it? Try to prove yourself wrong? Right? Because as founders, you're overly optimistic about your idea anyways. So if somebody even is slightly positive, you're going to take that and run with it and tell your own story. How about going to people and going, hey, if this thing existed, it would suck, right? You would never want to use it? No, it sounds interesting. No, but you wouldn't really use it daily. Maybe. Why? Well, would you pay money for it? Yeah. Can I have your money to build it? Right? And you go up the scale of validation. If they give you money, that's the highest level of validation, at least in this type of context. So just how you're trying to go about implementing some of these strategies really matters. And if you try to use these things to prove yourself wrong and you do it in very convenient fashion, you're not really doing anything, right? You just read a book and you fool yourself with the things you read there, but you really didn't validate shit.
Yeah, so you know, I actually don't do lean startup in my program because I focus more on what PJ focused in Y Combinator. It turns out that every single startup is like a baby. When baby is born, what do? You feed the baby and you take the baby to the doctor. And what does the doctor do? Measures the baby. If the baby is growing, it's doing well. If it's not growing, it's not doing well. Same exact thing with startups. So growth is the single most important thing that can happen to any early stage startup because it essentially validates that there's a potential need. Things get a lot more complicated later. So like lean canvas in general is useful and you kind of want to go through it, but the reality is you could be doing a lot of paper pushing, but if you're not getting, you know, like cash in hand, or if you're not growing number of your users and customers, it's not really validation of any sorts.
I have personal experience with building startups, and I'm actually co-founder of a startup incubator in Zagreb. So startups are obviously clueless when they come. So it's fashionable, obviously, and they like discuss it with their friends and families, and it is greatest thing ever. And then it just in 2 weeks they are pivoting. So that's my experience. So we're not getting really good startups that Y Combinator is picking, or TechStars can. So they have 1,000 applications probably. They can pick 10 or 15. That's very good. But usually it looks quite bad when they come to our incubator, and really then they get all these questions and touch with reality. So and they should be failing. So that's just normal. And maybe one thing that we discussed earlier is regarding like disruption. So what we can see is disruption is you cannot teach startups to disrupt, but there are technological shifts that are enabling disruptions, and these incubators can then help them actually to disrupt because technological shift is happening, but not because they are building disruptive company. Or the social shift, yeah.
And I think disruption is just startups being pulled into the world. Like the need is already there. It's like, imagine these tracks that are hidden and we don't see them, and then somebody shines light on them, and then we just walk through them. It's not like, I think you can't force you can't force this onto the world. The most valuable company to come out of TechStars to date is a company called DigitalOcean, which is second hosting provider in the world, right behind Amazon. And I've never seen a company, I'm very close with the founders. They didn't go through my program, but I know them very well. They're based in New York. I've never seen anything being pulled into the market so quickly, and I can't even explain why. Like, it's just illogical because Amazon is such a dominant player, but they continue to acquire customers at an astronomical compounded rate months over months. So it just, the world wants it, and that's all there is to it.
This actually leads me to a question from the audience. I'm reading behind you over there, and the question becomes, okay, we really can't design startups, disruptive, but once we have startups and they have the proof of market and have traction and they are growing, what is necessary for them to really become scale-up startups, to really grow fast? Are there any advice you can give us on how to get good, solid startups with high growth prospects to actually grow fast? Maybe a question for Howard.
Yeah, say no. I think people actually don't focus on sales enough, so maybe it's a plug for Steli, but if you think about the high growth potential, it's because a lot of startups are, one, not focused. They're thinking about, okay, how do I raise my next round of funding? How do I get more technical talent? How do I, do something else? But they're not exclusively asking themselves, yes, how do I grow week over week by 15%, 20%? What are the marketing activities or sales activities we need to make that happen? What do we know, either works or doesn't work, and then kind of continue that. The ones that you see that are highly scalable today have figured that out. They understand what that sales model looks like. It might be complicated. It might be that, they do one form of sales in one market versus another, like they're running ads, they have a sales team here, they've got their founder speaking there, but they understand that all these 3 activities or 10 activities leads to 10%, 20%, 30% growth week over week, month over month. And so I think that's something that startups don't take the time to figure out, but it's what separates the ones that are growing at a breakneck speed from the ones that aren't.
Usually my experience is that they need to get investors who understand this and who will help them because they have no idea usually. So they might have success. So it happened to me like 15, 16 years ago when we got our investors. We had no idea about sales and marketing, and they really helped us. And this is what I can see with other startups. So they might be good technically, might have a good team, but they have no idea how to scale sales and what to do with marketing. So investors are obvious answer there.
So you need investors not for the money, but for the assistance they provide
Absolutely.
you and the focus they will require.
Yeah, money is commodity, so.
I would add one more thing. In my observation, team is absolutely critical. So you start with the founders. It's basically the group of people who, a single person or a group of people who started the company. And then ultimately all companies are people. Like bad companies are people and good companies are people. And if you can attract super talented people and continue to have like a high bar on who you hire, then you're going to be able to scale, because if there is an opportunity, then smart people working together are going to nail it and are going to figure it out. And I don't think that you can kind of pre-compute these things in advance. Like startups, they're uncomputable, like literally from computer science perspective, much like many things in life. So the only way you can kind of like win is if you have a group of people who continues to grow and be awesome and continuing to sort of like figure it out as the startup becomes a big company.
Howard, what about your opinion about this?
Yeah, so marketing and scaling is really just like putting a magnifying glass on your product, right? And if your product is really good, putting good marketing and growth tactics and maybe growth hacking or whatever you want to do with sales will make it look better and make it grow faster. But if your product is fundamentally crappy, it doesn't matter if you have Sean Ellis and all the world's best sales guys, you have, Steli here kind of doing your sales, it's going to be a piece of crap and it's not going to grow. So really getting that product to a point that it's something that people want, and then bringing in, if you don't have an expertise of a marketing person, bring someone in, whether an advisor or in-house, and then putting forward to getting the growth part of it. That's how you kind of scale up. People try at an early point scaling, putting loads of marketing in before their product is actually something people want, and it just doesn't work out.
One thing on scaling is that a lot of startups scale prematurely, right? So again, it goes back to the same principle. You look at some numbers and you distort them either psychologically or mathematically in a spreadsheet in a way that makes them tell you what you want them to say, and you want them to say you're ready to scale. And then you go and you fool a bunch of other people to join you in that belief, and then you might fool some investors. And like a few rounds of funding and hundreds of employees later, you realize you were fucked. And it's very hard to then navigate back to any point where you are able to like make up for all this. So a lot of startups go too quickly or ask the question too quickly, how can we scale? Usually if you're doing the right thing, you're like, oh shit, this thing is growing. How can we make sure it doesn't fall apart? As like you have momentum on your side. Sometimes you have to generate that momentum. It's not like no startup ever had to do things to make momentum happen. But many startups try to do that too early. And if you're like, how do I know if it's too early? It's too early, right? If it's not so crystal clear that everybody that looks at it goes, holy shit, we need to scale, you're probably too early to worry about scaling. I just see a lot of startups get ahead of themselves and invest in things that ultimately are all the wrong things because we have not yet truly proven that we're solving a problem and that people really, really like what we do so much so that they want to pay us, and they don't just come and pay or download our app or do something, they're retained. They come, they download the app, and they come back every single fucking day. And they pay us money. And they stick around, not just for a day or two. Like, once you have retention, once you can prove success, then it's an interesting question to deliberate on. And then there are people out there to help you scale things. Not that it's an easy problem, but it's not the first problem you need to solve usually.
Yeah, I would ask you one final question. And we're talking about technological changes happening and basically startup using these paradigm shifts that are happening to their advantage to really disrupt the industries. Question for each of you, which industries you feel are the next to be disrupted?
The question, which industries are big for disruption? So I come from Ireland, I grew up on a farm, and that whole area of agriculture is one that I'm really excited about because generationally, people like my father, he wouldn't be able to turn on a computer. He could never send a text message in his life. People like myself and my brother, who are like really digitally savvy, are now taking over those farms. And I have seen like pretty much everything is done on the phone or on pieces of paper and through the post still. So it's a hugely inefficient kind of way of doing business in a world where we need to produce more good quality food. So I think agriculture, they actually call it ag tech. I've been looking into it. I think that space I'm really excited about.
Like, I don't know, it's like everything is changing. So it's like health is like from like trying to actually solve the problem after it happened, solve the problem before it happened, like big data is, and sensors and everything, that's obvious. Education, where we are actually active, is still not, I think, still not a really solved problem. So transportation, so actually everything. So it's difficult to say because opportunity today with mobile technology, with connectivity, is actually changing every industry. So
I do agree, but I challenge you to name one that you are most excited about.
That's, of course, like,
yeah, he does not have any power over you.
I will not say one. I will not say one. That's
okay. What will he do? Drag you off stage? Nothing.
I'll just tell you guys that I think that what's happening in US, what's happening here, what's happening in different parts of the world is not the same. So I just talked to a startup here in Slovenia in the real estate space, and they have a wonderful idea. I totally love it. It would never work in US, but it would totally work here. So when we talk about disruption, it's different, right? People are different, startups are different. I encourage you to think about what makes sense in your particular region. I personally don't know as much about it, but I think the notion that it's different in different places is wonderful. I am personally super excited about media, and hopefully there's going to be more intelligent media in US. I think media in Europe is already intelligent, so.
You're too kind. I would say I hope health, especially in terms of the flow of the medical documentation. That is a big pain, and that is what I hope for. And the preventive medicine, and I hope for that too. And all that goes into that, and I'm very excited about that. But, you know, that's what I hope for. Oh.
I have a mic. We have a mic. So, yeah, I mean, I loved his answer because it's mine as well. Everything will forever, hopefully, be disrupted, right? I mean, that's the only thing we know. What's the next thing? I don't fucking know. Probably probably the next real disruption will come from an area we all don't know. And the things that we're going to talk about now, the things that are kind of showing promise, which usually means they're not going to be the next thing that's going to bring the real disruption, because it needs to be disruptive. And if we already all are in the know, then what's the big example that's already proven that this is happening? So I don't know. Obviously, if the question is like, what would I love to be disrupted? It's definitely education and learning. Just because I think that the biggest resource on the planet is humans. We can solve all problems if we get humans to be able to get to those solutions. So if we can instill more passion and love for learning, and if we can give more access to learning and education to more people, I think that's really exciting. But will that really happen next in a big, bad way? I hope, but I don't know.
I think we've done a lot with automation when it comes to software, but I'm actually really excited about hardware automation. So I don't know if any of you have seen this meme on the internet, but there was a robot that they did like what happens when robots sound stupid, and you know what I'm talking about, right? He basically says like fuck every other word. Go look it up. But basically, this robot is as tall as we are, and what's interesting is to see all the advancements. So like it falls, it gets back up, it can open doors, it can pick up boxes, and I just looked at that thing and I told my husband, I need that. Because I have so many things around the house that need to be picked up, lifted, whatever, that's what I want. And he's like, it's going to be $1 million. So I'm curious to see when it comes to a more affordable level that I can pay for, just like I could buy a vacuum cleaner. So that's what excites me.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughts. I will ask the audience, do you have any questions for our guests up here? Can we get the microphone to the gentleman in the first row?
Let's see. Can we have number 4, pink number 4, please?
You've talked a lot about, well, first of all, I'm Juris Gadez, the founder of Exvida. We make hardware accessories for mobile devices. I've heard you talk a lot about growth, right? But how about making money? You haven't talked a lot about that, and I'll give you an example. So we're in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign right now, so we're halfway there, so about 2.5 weeks. And we're growing, we're using our own online marketing and so on, and we're now at 150%. So there is a company that has good track record. They're offering us to do marketing for us. And I calculated if we take them on board right now, they might do a good, growth for us, but it will cost us more than we're earning. So let's say we get a $100 pledge, we need to give them roughly $60. So does it make sense for us to do that?
Depends on your cost of goods.
Sorry?
Depends on your cost of goods.
Right, no, of course. No, what I'm saying is we are losing about 10% of our cost of goods. So let's say if our cost of goods is 100, we have to somehow, we get 90, right? So what I'm saying is essentially we're losing some money, not a lot, but we are losing money. If we take this company, I think we are losing money. I can't say we might break even, we might not.
Sure. So I think it comes down to figuring out, are those customers going to, like, are you going to attract new customers that you can retain? Do you have additional products and services you can sell to them? In which case, yeah, take the deal. If you feel like they're just going to, you know, burn and churn, then certainly it's not worth it if they're not high quality customers, if they're not going to buy repeat products. So anytime you do a marketing campaign, yes, there has to be some level of growth in terms of awareness, but it's got to translate to sales. And I think we're all in agreement about that. It is not, gone are the days of growth for the sake of growth. I mean, you can still do that if you're maybe like a Snapchat or a Pinterest, but you got to be growing 50% week over week, meaning you've got to get to 100 million users within a year or two.
And also, talk to people that have worked with them, to them directly, and ask them, you know, did they work with them again? What kind of quality customers did they bring? How did they really get them? What were the mistakes made that they wouldn't want to repeat? But if you can finance it, then these questions are really important. If you can't finance it, then no, right? Then the answer is really simple, no. Like if you can finance growth and get the money back down later, that's a beautiful thing if you know how to do it. But if you can't finance that, just say no and move on.
That was expected from you.
Of course, I'm trying to stay on theme here. People keep me honest. They check me when I say yes.
And now I have to jump in. I could listen to you guys and girls all day long, but the thing is we're all quite hungry as we have to continue at 3 o'clock. I have to jump in. I'm so sorry. It's time for some lunch. Any last words from you?
No, would just like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It was my pleasure being here in your company. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.